Okay?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here with us tonight for our last presentation for the series of lectures being conducted during the winter semester. Tonight it is my great pleasure to present two archaeologists. One of them, Maria Paskhali, is a postdoctoral researcher in art history and digital humanities at CYENS Centre of Excellence and an archaeologist at the Department of Antiquities in Cyprus. She was awarded her PhD and MA in the History of Art from the Courtauld Institute of Art, University of London. Previously, she obtained a Master's of Arts in Museum Studies at the University of Newcastle and the Bachelor of Arts in History and Archaeology with specialization in Archaeology and History of Arts at the National Kapodistrian University of Athens. Dr. Pashkhali has mainly published on late medieval monumental paintings ranging from cathedrals to Benedict churches in the port city of Famagusta. Central themes in her research focus on the role of imagery, more traditionally associated with Byzantine, Islamic, and Gothic art in the Eastern Mediterranean, as well as the challenges in curating the Middle Ages during the digital age. Currently at CYENS, she is engaged in the European Union's Horizon 2020 research project titled Enhancement of Heritage Experiences, the Middle Ages, Digital Layered Models of Architecture and Mural Paintings Over Time, end quote. For this project, she focuses on the Enkleistra of Neophytos in Paphos and its visualization across time. Dimitris Mηνασίδης, who is her colleague and the co-presenter of the communication, is a PhD candidate in Byzantine archaeology and art at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and works on Theophanies and the iconography in the Byzantine and medieval monumental art of Cyprus. His PhD research is funded by the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki through the Research Committee and the Department of Archaeology. He also holds a Bachelor of Arts with specialization in archaeology and history of art and the Masters of Arts in Byzantine archaeology and art from the Aristotle University. He has published several articles emanating from his master's thesis on the so-called Royal Chapel at Pirga in Cyprus. His research interests lie in late antiquity, Byzantine and medieval texts and images in Constantinople, Mount Athos, and Cyprus in particular, as well as in digital archaeology. He has worked as a research associate on European and national research projects in Greece. More recently, he participated in the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London / Getty Foundation's Connecting Art Histories online research project, Medieval Eastern Mediterranean Cities as Places of Artistic Exchange, end quote. He currently works as an archaeologist at the Department of Antiquities of Cyprus in a research project which aims to digitize artifacts from museums in Cyprus. And this dynamic neophyte will present a paper titled Light, Sight, and Theophanic Contemplation at the Enkleistra of Agios Neophytos. Maria and Dimitri, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for this kind introduction. I would like to thank all the organizers of this wonderful series of lectures for the invitation to present an aspect of our research on the culture of Cyprus. Before beginning our lecture, we would like to express our gratitude to the Monastery of St. Neophytos and to the Department of Antiquities of Cyprus for their kind permission to work on the Enkleistra of St. Neophytos. Neophytos the Recluse, the founder of the Enkleistra near Paphos, alluded in its monastic typikon to the painter's technique of applying varnish for brightening up the painted images. This artistic practice was mentioned by Neophytos as an alternative to his ascetic canons, which will help the Enkleistra's brethren to return to the original beauty in God's image, with Christ's cooperation and grace. In technical analysis at the Enkleistra's church in 2009, Ioanna Kakouli detected the use of a coat of varnish on a late 12th century Byzantine-style wall painting of the enthroned Christ, which is a customary technique in Byzantine portable painted icons rather than in mural icons. Yet the significance of the brightness of Christological images has been overlooked in art historical and visual studies of the monument. On the other hand, the Enkleistra's limited lighting conditions, also hinted by Neophytos, made the experience of seeing the pictorial decoration often difficult, even in daylight. Its setting in a cliff allowed natural light only from the east, through the then fewer openings. The documented architecture and decoration of the rock-cut Enkleistra and the written sources of Neophytos himself offer a rare opportunity to examine this paradoxical situation between light and fleeting visibility in this sacred place, and to apprehend how images of Christ were spiritually experienced by Neophytos and his congregation. Moving from what is actually seen to what is seen beyond, Artin White's lecture explores the connotations of bright light in the dim space of the Enkleistra by focusing in particular on the Theophanic contemplation of its Christological images. In Neophytos' initial cell at the site, the image of the deities, with the dominant figure of Christ enthroned between the Virgin Mary and St. John the Baptist, provides a good starting point for our investigation of his spiritual perception while meditating in this space. Attributed to the artist Theodore Absevdis, it was the most prominent painting in his cell and was set up in 1183 on the north wall, just beside and above Neophytos' desk, the place where he spent his days praying, studying, writing, and sleeping. At his eye level when seated, Neophytos was also depicted in this painting as a suppliant below these figures. The text, inscribed beside his representation, reads, "Christ, through the prayers of your mother and your Baptist, who stand reverently by your holy throne, be merciful now and forevermore to him who lies as a suppliant at your divine foot." It should be noted here that a longer, but unfortunately now partly legible prayer is visible beneath this painted layer and also alludes to the land of salvation. The display as a whole conveys Neophytos' personal plea, which could have been repeated in his meditations. The contemplation of the Last Judgment was, after all, an essential part of monastic ascesis and spirituality. One can visualize that this mural panel was illuminated by the unsteady flicker of two oil lamps. These were presumably suspended from wooden pegs on either side of the throne of Christ, namely two small areas of paint loss recorded as white patches in a photo taken before the restoration works of 1963, which were overseen by Cyril Mango and Ernest Hawkins. When illuminated, the chrysography and other gilded details on this painting could have made the gold and glitter sparkle, creating an illusion of movement and vibrancy. Remarkably, the enthroned Christ at the center of this mural is the most heavily highlighted figure webbed in chrysography on the surviving mural decoration of Neophytos' cell. Besides applying varnish on his representation enthroned, the figure of Christ was also given chrysography on his drapery in the scene of the Anastasis and on his halo in his apparition to the holy women, singling him out in the Enkleistra's church as well. The extensive deployment of gold on Christ imaging, focusing light on him, alludes to the light of his second coming. Neophytos described the brightness of the second coming of Christ in his homily on this event. In another homily, he mentally perceived the unutterable light of Christ's presence in the second coming as lightning. Likewise, the mystical lighting arrangement visually echoes Neophytos' concise commentary on Psalm 131, which inter alia links the ordained lamp of David for Christ to the heavenly Jerusalem. Above the place where Neophytos sat and led in his cell, prophets were depicted in the dome-shaped vault. In his time, brightness must have emanated from gilded details around Daniel's head. Recording one of Daniel's Theophanic visions, the inscription on his open scroll reads, "I beheld till the thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days did sit," as is prescribed later by the painter's manual of Dionysius of Furnam. As it is known in Christian thought, the Ancient of Days was associated with Christ, who judges humanity. The only other legible inscription in the vault that presumably the prophet David holds similarly draws attention to God, seated on his throne. This text that mentioned the throne seemed thereby connected to the enthroned Christ and the prayer in the Deisis panel. They were also found in Neophytos' writings. Furthermore, Neophytos wrote that Christ, quote, "will sit on a throne of glory as a prominent and splendid sun, shining upon the ends of the earth," end quote. While the jewel-adorned cover of the Gospel book that Christ holds in the Deisis panel can also be perceived as a vehicle of light, the Gospel itself can be understood as a means for the Theophanic manifestation of the incarnated Logos and his enduring presence. The dazzling effulgence of Christ's figure as a whole expresses his hypostatic character as a means to manifest God. Moreover, in this mural, the face and neck of the Virgin Mary are surrounded by gold highlights, simulating her radiance, which Neophytos described in a homily as receiver of the sun and more brilliant than the sun, prayer to the Mother of God through the shadows, Skian, and her icon, Iconisma, as detailed in his same homily, highlight, of course, his faith and enable us to visualize Neophytos' prayer to her through this painting, brought about by the shifting light, which must have been transforming the mural's carved surface. The long-pendant golden tassels attached on the hem of Mary's imperial purple-red maphorion in the Deisis panel, and alluded to briefly yet several times in Neophytos' writings, hinted too at her lustrous appearance. On the whole, the luminous and vivifying effects of this Theophanic display functioned as a sentient means for experiencing divine nearness. Perceived in this way, this optical yet intangible manifestation facilitated communion with God and indicated a path of communication for Neophytos' desire for his soul's salvation. The play of shimmer on the painting surface ostensibly animates the figures, and therefore, in Neophytos' mind's eye, seems to have reified his hope of being admitted into the kingdom of God by activating glimpses into the promised kingdom that will become fulfilled only at the end of time. The painting, through its bright gold spots, gave ephemeral access to the expected result of the inscribed prayers. Neophytos' expectation to be accepted into heaven is also betrayed in another 12th century mural of his Enkleistra. On the inscribed scroll, the enthroned Virgin Mary, bearing Christ's child, holds up in the central image of the monk's burial cavity that reads, "Grant, my son, remission to him who lies here." This is understood as Neophytos' prayer, which is delivered by the Virgin, transmitting his hope for salvation. After all, Neophytos prays here as the highway to the heavenly realm. The inscription ends with the answer of Christ to the intercession of the Virgin. That is, I grant it, moved as I am by your prayers, which clearly works as a daring statement by offering Neophytos the promise of salvation. In order to achieve contrition, Neophytos, like other ascetics of his time, such as St. Kyrillos Philotheos, recommended the contemplation of Christ's passion in his writings. In fact, the Passion was pictorially rendered opposite the daisies in the narrative scene of the crucifixion, which was painted there twice during his stay in this cell. In his second cell, named as Musion, and in his Agiasterion in a prayer niche, the Passion of Christ was visually expressed in an abbreviated form through merely its instruments, namely a cross with a crown of thorns flanked by the sponge and the lance. The depiction of the Passion instruments in the upper levels of the Enkleistra complex took place after Neophytos moved there in around 1196, 1197. All these crosses across his stay at the Enkleistra visually echo Neophytos' various invocations to the all-venerable and all-sacred cross in his plethora of written works. In his initial cell at the Enkleistra, yet another cross can be seen below the daisies panel. It was painted at the center of the recess, arching above Neophytos' desk. This brown cross with 3 arms was notably set against 3 concentric luminous rings. The Greek inscription, Jesus Christ, Son of God, was notably set in the innermost circle. The painting of the cross with luminous rings calls to mind the image, iconisma, that Neophytos described in a panegyrical homily on the elevation of the cross, where he intimated the significance of the 3 suns and the 3 hoods in understanding the substantial Trinity. In Neophytos' cell, the 3 luminous rings and the 3-armed cross could thereby be regarded as a representation of the inseparable Trinity, signifying the glory and worship of the 3 persons together. It is worth noting that the 6th century grammarian and poet John of Gaza wrote about a similar central motif in his ekphrasis of a now lost yet lavish wall painting that adorned a contemporary bathhouse in Gaza. And he called the gold cross surrounded by 3 concerting circles of blue an auspicious mark of the Trinity and the heavenly realm. Likewise, the cross was regarded by Neophytos as the mark, typos, of the inseparable Trinity. It should be noted here that while the Church of the Enkleistra was dedicated to the Holy Cross, Neophytos asked in his testamentary rule for a Church of the Trinity to be built nearby. Like other authors, Neophytos perceived the consubstantiality of the Trinity in terms of light. For example, he used the phrases, the light of the Trinity, and holy thrice light of the inseparable Trinity. He astonishingly used as metaphors for the 3 names of the Trinity 6 sets of 3 nouns: sun, light, and ray, fire, flame, and light, fire, light, and heat, light, intense heat, and fire, sun, light, and radiance, sun, intense heat, and ray. Furthermore, in the same homily, Neophytos wrote, the elevation of the cross makes the heavenly sphere and the world brighter. In this painting, the combination of colors, lightening from deep red on the innermost circle to light gray on the middle one to white on the outermost one, thus suggests the brilliance emanating from the cross. For light was then artistically expressed in red, its shine in gray, and as it got furthest from its source, it became white. Conformably to this painting, red appears beside gray in the color scale of the famous Suda's lexicon, which is probably dated to around 1000. The idea of divine light also seems to have striking effects in the Holy Cross Church at the Enkleistra complex. More specifically, light was amplified in the composition of Christ's Elkomenos and the crucifixion, which here form a single panel on the northeast corner of the space. In the first of the two scenes, entitled Drawn to the Cross, the mountain behind the cross was conspicuously rendered in light gray with white lines, suggesting the radiating divine light emitting from the cross. We owe this insightful observation to Maria Pασχάλη. An inscription from John's Gospel above the group of Jews in this scene, which reads, "We have a law, and by our law he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God," enables Theophanic contemplation of the episode. In this context, the conspicuous depiction of light surrounding the cross could once again allude to the understanding of it as divine. In general, the Holy Cross received a prominent place at his Enkleistra. In fact, Neophytos dedicated the earliest altar on the site to the Holy Cross on the feast day of the elevation of the cross, namely on the 14th of September in 1160, notably 5 years earlier than his acquisition of a fragment of the cross. It seems that the subsequent possession of the relic and the dedication of the Enkleistra's church to the Holy Cross played a role in the careful planning of its narrative mural cycle that emphasized Christ's passion. Functioning as a display for the veneration of the cross relic, the cruciform recess in the east wall was located directly below the scene of the crucifixion. One wonders whether the window at the upper arm of the cruciform recess in the east wall, which was evidently an afterthought, was undertaken during Neophytos' time. Notwithstanding, a luminous display for the reliquary cross was eventually created. Two archangels gestured towards the recess by extending one hand, perhaps to indicate the relic between them as a focus for contemplation and devotion. In addition, the recurrent depiction of a pair of angels in the 3 consecutive scenes featuring the cross, Christ's Elkomenos, the crucifixion, and the descent from the cross, augments their emphasis on the cross, seemingly invoking the cross relic. Furthermore, in the lower register of haloed figures, the depiction of Saints Constantine and Helena, the only female saint represented in the sanctoral cycle of the whole Enkleistra complex, can also be associated with the presence of this relic in the church. Neophytos is known to have composed 2 panegyrics for the feast day of the elevation of the cross, which coincided with the annual celebration of the foundation of the Enkleistra's church. As with homilies in general, the panegyric's audience was not only the members of his monastic community, but also the lay pilgrims visiting the monastery. In the homily on the elevation of the Holy Cross, Neophytos eloquently requests from the crucified Christ to illuminate his mind's eye through the cross, so as to complete the road to salvation. The sunlight filtering through the small east window above the figure of Christ within the crucifixion mural panel could have evoked the salvation of humanity, represented by the light of the cross. Furthermore, at the Enkleistra, the soteriological message of the light of the cross was reinforced by 2 Greek tetragrams that were written in red around the red cross in the niche of the bema's southwest corner. Translate as "the light of Christ illuminates all." This text was pronounced during the liturgy of the presanctified gifts. The luminous effect of the crucified Christ was sung during the feast day of the elevation of the cross and announced, "The light of your face has been imprinted on us." Mentioned in Psalm 4:7, this verse was also chanted before the distribution of the Eucharist and was known as the communion verse in this context. Significantly, below the window of the crucifixion scene in the church, the personification of the New Testament holds a gilded chalice, gathering the blood and water that pours from Christ's hand. The gilded adornment of this cup can suggest divine indwelling, thereby alluding to the hypostatic position of Eucharistic wine. Likewise, in the following scene of the descent from the cross, the gold highlights on the garments of Joseph of Arimathea, who holds the dead body of Christ, can also hint at divine indwelling, alluding to the hypostatic condition of Eucharistic bread. The liturgical reading of these elements can be supported by the depiction of the aforementioned pair of archangels wearing oraria, serving as deacons below the crucifixion scene. This reading raises the question of whether the two conspicuous gilded wooden caskets outlined with a shiny row of precious white pearls and held by the pair of archangel deacons could be also better understood in this context. In addition, the small block recorded in this photo in 1963 below the cruciform recess and the still surviving small niche to the left may have had a liturgical role in communion services. Embedded in such a setting, the display thus associated the blood, water, and bread in the performance of the Eucharistic rite with the Theophanic connotations of light. Neophytos cogitated over the state of Christ's sacrifice and wrote a homily engaging in a topical theological controversy. The debate concerned the precise nature of the Eucharistic bread and wine. Initiated apparently by monk Michael Gligas in Constantinople, this debate about the incorruptibility of the body of Christ sloshed around in the Byzantine ecumeny at the turn of the 13th century. In this homily, Neophytos expressed that the flesh of Christ was incorruptible before and after the communion, providing his insight within a liturgical context. Thus, the conspicuous gold highlights on the chalice and Joseph of Arimathea in the crucifixion and deposition scenes respectively may reveal that this controversy have taken on a local, yet intense, mystical significance. In August 1196, Neophytos composed the other panegyrical homily in praise of the Holy Cross, for yet again the feast of its elevation. The panegyric occurred the year ascribed to the completion of the church mural decoration, based on the information provided by a later inscription on the west wall of the naos. Interestingly, the inscriptions painted on the church demonstrated intimate connections with this panegyric. The particular text from the prophecies, which were inscribed on the painted scroll of two prophets, namely Moses and Isaiah, on the sailing beside the crucifixion scene, we are quoted in this homily as an illustration for Christ's salvific passion. The inscription on Moses' scroll reads, "You will see your life hanging before your eyes." It is found earlier in an extended form on the scroll of Moses in the Holy Trinity Pareklesion at the monastery of Kutsovendis, where Neophytos began his monastic life and must have been familiar with its wall painting. At Koutsouventis, Moses is yet again associated with a prominent image of the crucifixion. The inscription on Isaiah's scroll reads, "He was wounded for our sins and was weakened for our transgressions." This text, which was adapted from Isaiah, was repeated in several works by Neophytos the Recluse, such as the commentary on the canons of the 12th Feast of the Lord, the Book of 50 Chapters, and the Book of Catechesis. Next to these prophets, David and Jeremiah were represented holding scrolls with scriptural extracts from their prophecies, which were also quoted by Neophytos in other written works. The inscription on David's scroll reads, "He worked salvation in the midst of the earth. It was you who strengthened the sea by your power." It was included in Neophytos' other homily on the Holy Cross and in the 10 homilies on Christ's commandments. The inscription on Jeremiah's scroll reads, "Come and let us put wood into his bread, and let us grind him off." This passage is featured in Neophytos' commentary on the Psalms. The fact that this inscribed text, taken or adapted from the Old Testament, were included in Neophytos' works, reveals the exegetical and didactic connotations of this decoration, supporting its soteriological meaning. Shown as theophanic witnesses here, the prophets are pictorially reinforcing their prophecies. Through the shifts in lighting, the gilded halos of Moses and Jeremiah would have seemed to be living figures, almost capable of speech, when the faithful moved in this space. In addition, Isaiah gestures with his right hand and points and cries Elkomelos below him. Moses, with his frowned eyebrows, expresses restrained sorrow for the crucified Christ beside him, while raising his right hand, directing the viewer's eye to the crucifixion scene. Despite being hardly legible from the ground, Moses' first word on his scroll strikingly speaks of seeing. Similarly, the earlier painted inscription on the scroll of St. John Chrysostomos, who was represented facing towards the wall painting of yet another image of the crucifixion in Neophytos' burial cavity at the Enkleistra, supports the significance of sight in comprehending the crucifixion of Christ as a mystery. The painted decoration of his tomb, however, was not meant to be visible due to the hall that Neophytos himself requested to be built in front of it after his burial. The visibility of the crucifixion scene in the church could have been impeded in turn by natural light coming in through the window. Even if we assume that the glass was very milky and transluted, and thus admitting a very suffused rather than bright light, the window would still prevent the painting from being viewed clearly. Nevertheless, throughout the year, and especially on the feast of the church dedication to the elevation of the true cross, the presence of the cross relic could have stimulated the minds of medieval monks and occasional visitors with the mystery of the crucified Christ, namely as part of God's plan for the salvation of humanity. Moving now in the bema, the most significant point of brightness in this small space was this window within the wall painting of the Ascension of Christ, namely below Christ and between the two groups of apostles. Neophytos regarded the 12 apostles as splendid stars and flashes of lightning spreading a bright glare around the world, figures who were sent to disseminate the light of God's knowledge to humanity, allowing yet again Theophanic contemplation. When daylight was entering from this window, the ascending Christ, who was enveloped by the mandorla, must have been barely visible. Nevertheless, it evoked light similar to what the depicted apostles witnessed through the bright cloud in this temporary manifestation of Christ in his divine glory. The 5 circular perforations of the window's transenna, through which the sunlight enters this space, would have accentuated the dazzling spectacle. Neophytos' catechesis to his monks refer to Christ's ascension irradiating the faithful. Comparing the second coming to Christ's ascension, the latter has, as Neophytos put it, the form of, quote, splendid sun shining upon the whole world, end quote. In addition, the imperial garment of the angel, with traces of gilded details among the apostles in the ascension scene, allude at Christ's second coming. However, the figure of Christ in this scene would have been perhaps more visible by artificial light and during nocturnal services in this space. It is noteworthy that Neophytos also used the splendid sun as a theological metaphor for St. John Chrysostom, who is represented above the other window in the bema. He was given the place of honor among the church fathers in this zone, rather than the usual arrangement of equal number of hierarchs converging towards the center. It possibly betrays Neophytos' choice in the mural decoration of this space, due perhaps to the fact that St. John Chrysostom was a patron saint of the Kutsovendis monastery, in which Neophytos was tonsured monk in 1152. In an astonishing wall painting in the vault of the bema, Neophytos is depicted ascending to heaven with the help of 2 archangels, with the iconography mirroring the representation of Christ's ascension in the same space, though without a halo or a mandorla. The inscription that runs above these figures can be read either, "O holy pair, I fervently pray that this image should come true," or "May I be indeed enrolled among the angels by virtue of my monastic habit." The display as a whole manifests Neophytos' expectation to follow Christ with his own ascension. This is also expressed in the final paragraph of Neophytos' panegyric for the Holy Cross in 1196. Similarly, a commentary text intimates Neophytos' hope to be admitted to heaven by angels of radiant light. Indeed, traces of gilded details on the collar of Archangel Michael call to mind Neophytos' description of him in another panegyric, praising the archangel as clothed with lightning and many times more brilliant than the sun and moon and various stars. These gilded details of the painted archangels will have given the impression of Neophytos' exaltation to the viewer, who moved in this candle-lit space. On the whole, the monk's representation among 2 imperially dressed archangels in the vault of the bema visually exalt and glorify him. The radiance of the wall paintings, through the deployment of color scheme, varnish, and chrysography on selected surfaces, animated the images, potentially facilitating a channel of communication with the divine. What we have illustrated is that even though our experience of the brighter interior enables us to see more today, it is the dim ambience in Neophytos' time that allow us to learn more about Theophanic contemplation in his monastic community. In addition, the light that filters through the windows within the scenes of the crucifixion and ascension of Christ radiantly reveal how the display can be thoughtful, acting as a medium for understanding the mystery of God's salvific grace. Besides the intentional design of the mise-en-scène, the Enkleistra's mural adornment seems connected to the mindset of Neophytos and the spiritual needs of his community. To them, the fleeting visibility of Christological images was perhaps more significant in directing the mind's eye to the manifestation of God's grace and majesty than has so far been appreciated. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Maria. Okay, and Dimitris. I take it that this is the conclusion?
Yes.
Well, I think that is a very thought-provoking talk, very richly illustrated in terms of imagery and explication of the images, analysis. So I expect there will be quite a lot of questions, comments, and discussions. So I would now like to throw open the floor for discussion. Any questions? Any questions from anyone in the audience regarding this talk? Any comments?
May I ask something?
Yes, go ahead.
Maria, hello. Hi.
Hello.
Thanks a lot for very erudite analysis of all that. I just want to, you did provide us with a very sort of detailed investigation, explanation, analysis of how the paintings, the writings of Neophytos, the experience of the space inside the Enkleistra may have functioned. I'm just wondering how, well, to what extent did anyone realize all this? Did anyone notice all this? I mean, Neophytos, obviously, he was in charge of the decoration, and he knew what he was writing about, so he would have had perhaps in mind all these various connections. Would they be sort of available, understandable to anybody else? Perhaps, I don't know, I imagine some of his monks with him, they could have discussed while being there and looking at the paintings, they could have discussed all these issues and what lies behind everything. But beyond that, do we assume that this was something that a wider audience would have had access to, would have understood, would have participated in? I mean, how do we view all this?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's my comment and question.
Thank you, Tassos. I can hear myself. What about now? Okay. So this is a very good question, and it also helps to refine the methodology of approaching such kind of monuments and the interpretation of its mural paintings and decoration. So what we'll try to do is look closely at the images, but in combination with the actual inscriptions on the images. But as I have shown several times, these were not actually visible because they are high up because of the lighting conditions. So apart from that part of approaching the wall paintings, we try to read a lot the surviving writing works of Neophytos, and we can assume, with a certain amount of certainty, that at least himself and his close monastic community were like the receiver of these ideas, because they were hearing about them a lot during their stay there. And also when there were some pilgrims while Neophytos was still alive. But it's true that this is a very sophisticated program with very sophisticated messages. And it is very possible that after his death and the scattering of his works, it may have the paintings must have been misunderstood by his followers. I mean, following his death, and I think that that's one of the reasons why all this discussion came up about, for example, the ascension of Neophytos and how it was misunderstood after his death, and how it performed uses that are beyond Neophytos' perhaps own intention.
Okay.
Just think, for example, that the community, the monastic community today has as its logo the figure of Neophytos ascending to heaven, the one that I show you, but he bears a halo. And also in that later silver casket of him, which is still in the, it's much later and it's still in the Catholicon. Again, there you can find him with a halo, again within the Ascension composition of Neophytos.
Can I add also that we know that when Neophytos read his homilies inside Enkleistra, there were also visitors inside. So who knows, maybe they saw some of these elements.
Yeah. There is a question or comment from Professor Athanasios Semoglu.
Thank you very much, Maria.
Yeah.
Yes, it's sorry. Thank you for your stimulating paper. I want to ask you something. Maybe I didn't hear. Do we know anything about the details of a daily liturgy? A kind of typicon, for example, if there are candles during certain liturgies or certain feasts in front of some compositions or something like that. Do we know something about these details for the Enkleistra?
I think we don't have any typical with detail about the liturgy, but if you see in the Holy Church the cross with the angels, this is like the Stavroproskinesis liturgy of Constantinople. So maybe someone can guess that there was some movements from the Holy Cross Church to the Bema, but we don't have any text of Neophytos with the details about them.
Okay, thank you. And once again, congratulations.
May I ask something else if nobody has questions right now? About this, since you explained, Maria, how important well, it all has to do, of course, with the lighting, how things are lit, what people inside this space can see, how they see it, when, and all that. You showed how few openings there are actually allowing in natural light. And you mentioned the window there with the roundels, the glass roundels. I mean, I wonder how much do we know about the original arrangements, because this presumably is a more recent restoration, what we see in the window. But I guess we assume it was similar originally, right? I mean, I was also wondering whether we could assume that it was completely open, actually, considering how small these openings are. Perhaps there was nothing there. No frame, no glass, nothing at all. I don't know what the archaeological evidence suggests. I've never looked at this. I don't know whether you know anything more about it.
Maria?
I think she's trying to unmute herself.
Yes, because I can't see her.
Can you unmute Maria? Because
Yes, can you hear me now? That's actually a question that I was planning to ask you. But the only concrete evidence that I have is actually indirect. It's from an article published in the Bordeaux papers from Francesca Delacqua. She was studying Middle Byzantine windows, and she, of course, she didn't mention the Enkleistra, but she found concrete evidence of circular glass discs actually surviving from the Middle Byzantine period. But yes, we don't have any evidence that it imitates something similar that we see today. But it's possible that it may have been like this. Only that we are not certain. Mm-hmm. But that idea and that description of Neophytos about Polyphotos, it calls to mind this kind of arrangement to me.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, because it's so dark in there, even without anything at those openings, you would hardly be able to see anything. So as you explained, the crystallography would have helped in that, sort of reflecting the little light there is and allowing viewers to make out the different figures and scenes and interpret them. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Any further questions or comments? Well, I have a question of my own. In your very interesting talk and very richly illustrated with images, there's a big emphasis on light, on how light is perceived or projected. Now, one of the, for me, most outstanding examples of light in the Gospels is the Old Testament example of the burning bush that appeared before the prophet Moses on Mount Sinai. But it seems that all the imagery in the cave of St. Neophytos is Christological. I mean, there doesn't seem to be anything from the Old Testament, even though this is, for me, a very strong example. Can we explain that?
It's true that all the representations are from the New Testament, except from the one, Φιλοξενείο του Αβραάμ, which is in the Holy Church. When it's in the right when you are entering the church. I think it's because.
Church, do you mean part of the Enkleistra or the church built during the Venetian period? Which church?
The new one, the one that you enter now.
Yes, but that was built centuries after Neophytos' death, correct?
No, the Catholicon. Oh. There are three places: the cell, the bema, and the Church of Holy Cross.
Yes.
In there is the Philoxenia. It's the only depiction of the Old Testament.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I think that Neophytos choose to represent the Theophanies of New Testament.
Yes. Oh, you mean he didn't really care for Old Testament imagery, and even if it included light, he was much more interested in the New Testament.
Yes.
I think in the Trapeza there is an Old Testament scene.
Yes, it's the oration of Daniel, but we don't have it. It's only fragments.
But it surely is from the period of Neophytos.
Of Neophytos, yes. And also the Mother of God near it, yes.
Okay, then. So there is some Old Testament imagery, but it's quite limited. And it doesn't include the burning bush, which is a very strong example of light, the light, the divine light appearing before Moses. Okay. Any more questions or comments?
Nicola, if I may ask something, please.
Yes.
Congratulations, dear Maria and Dimitri, for this fascinating lecture. Just a point. Could you distinguish any contribution of the painter himself, Theodoros Absevdis, in this combination of text, of image and text? Could you assume any suggestions? Because I am sure the donor, St. Neophytos, had his own ideas, but maybe discussing them with Theodoros Absevdis, who apparently was a painter of high caliber, formed in the Constantinopolitan most academic milieu. Could you distinguish any contribution in this combination of image and text by the painter himself? We cannot hear you, Maria.
Maria, can you please unmute yourself?
At a certain point, the artist may have presented his own ideas as well to these mural decoration of the Enkleistra, but it's difficult to discern which details are actually his own. And I will suggest that we have to be very careful about who is Theodoros Absevdis and which of the paintings he actually created in the church, and even about his origins. We are not certainly sure about that, and also about his connections with Aragaz. So it's just making things more complicated if we try to see it through the eyes of Theodoros Absevdis, while at the same time you have Neophytos with all these written documents about his ideas. But certainly, we never thought that this is only Neophytos' ideas. And we have, again, to be very careful about that. Surely the interaction with other monastic communities of the time, his travels to the Eastern Mediterranean, all this influenced the program. It's not only the ideas of Neophytos, but we have to be very careful about Theodoros Absevdis and don't construct a narrative that does not have any historical sources affiliated to that. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria.
Well, everyone, any more questions or comments? Well, there don't seem to be any further questions or any additional comments. I would like to thank both Maria and Dimitris for what has been a very stimulating and thought-provoking talk this evening. I also thought that the quality of the imagery was absolutely wonderful. And I would simply like to remind our audience before we sign off that there is a final talk Tuesday on the, I think that is the 13th of December. Is that correct, Sophocles?
Yes, on the 13th.
And this talk to Sophocles is titled?
Kostas Papakostas is delivering his speech. It's about the coat of arms during the Venetian period. Maybe Kostas can announce it for us because I don't have just in front of me.
I don't have the details either. I remember it's about the Venetian period.
I will be
sorry about that.
Yeah, I will be talking about the uses of heraldry in Venetian Cyprus and how coats of arms can be sort of employed by cultural historians, archaeologists, well, stating the obvious, but yeah, through a couple of examples, lesser known examples.
Well, thank you very much. I don't think it's quite as obvious as you make out. So we very much look forward to hearing you on the 13th of December, Dassos. Okay, we'll be there. And if there are no further comments or questions, I would like to call the presentation to a close with a big thank you once again to Maria and to Dimitri. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
We forgot the comments. There are some comments with congratulations.
Let's have a look at the chat.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Μας ακούτε?
Ναι,
Ναι.